welcome back, guys. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about something that is, fairly serious, I think. But before that, we are your hosts. My name is Christina.
I'm Ashley.
And this is More Than Missionary. On today's episode, we are going to be discussing how young is too young to talk about sex. I work with children. As my career at this point, and I definitely have some opinions and pretty strong ones about what age is an appropriate age to start talking about that, and how to progress from there in regards to discussing a sensitive topic like with young children. So that being said, I don't know if Ashley, if you have questions or if you want to wait or how you want to start this.
I would say, let's start with the biggest question, mm-hmm. right? How young is too young to start talking about sex with your children?
So listen, I just want to caveat, this is my opinion, okay? I am not a doctor. I am not a psychologist. That's in our disclaimer. This is my opinion. This is based off of my experience with children and how I experienced growing up and how it was spoken to me about. I was very lucky. I grew up in a household that was very open. If I had questions, it was answered honestly. That being said, I did grow up in a fairly religious household, so there was honest answers with some caveats of things that I would probably do differently when I have my own children. But I would say that you could start pretty young. Like, you can honestly, I have a memory of talking to my mom about sex at like 5.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean how do I go about this? When you're talking about sex with kids, it needs to be age appropriate. You can't just start talking about some serious nitty-gritty things with kids. It's going to go over their head. They're not going to understand. You might traumatize them depending on what you're saying. So kids are naturally very, very curious. And really gauge where they're at. If they start coming to you with questions, answer them honestly. I have had children now where do babies come from? Right? That's things like that. Like, well, how did I get here? Things like that. These kind of questions about themselves and about babies. And I don't agree with this idea of being like, they were flown in on a stork. No, don't be honest with them. I think that it would be a great approach to that. Well, when they start asking those questions, if you're caught off guard and they're asking a question and you don't have an answer and you don't want to answer it right away, be like, you know what, honey, that is a really good question. You know what? I think, let's talk about it later tonight and we can talk about that. Or if you're in a relationship with somebody or their parents, or that, you're in a dual parent household with your child, to discuss that with your partner before diving into that conversation with children. Mm-hmm. I do have, so I'm going to bring out my phone up right now because I do have, there is a really great website called healthychildren.org, and it kind of gives when and how to talk with your child about sex, and I think it gives a really good template in going into it. Like I said, a lot of this has to do with age-appropriate conversations. Obviously, you're not going to talk about the birds and the bees with a 5-year-old. That's not, they're not going to understand that fully, in my opinion. So I think I would, if they ask those questions, you'll have to figure out a way to talk about that is age-appropriate, right? Mm-hmm. Another thing, too, is everything for me growing up, anatomically was correct, right? I know that a lot of parents, this is it's so uncomfortable to talk about something like this, but I am a firm believer in using anatomically correct words. If you have a child and they have a penis, call it a penis. I understand calling it your private parts, and I do say that, especially it's because if it's not my child, I am not, I'm gauging a lot of the times how their parents are with the children. But if it, with my children, like I will be using anatomically correct words, and there is research that is done on using those anatomically correct words with them, where it doesn't, it allows children to not feel shame around their genitals, and also it can help prevent shame around trigger warning with CSA. And if your child is comfortable, like if they're comfortable with using those words, they're going to probably be more comfortable coming to you with an issue of that degree, of that magnitude. So it's something that I think is really important to just be really upfront with them. And then on top of that, you also will avoid, like if you start saying like those are no words, they're going to be more inclined to want to use it as in a joking manner than they are in a like this is what it is in a reality manner. So I think that those things are really important too.
Yeah.
So starting at a young age, I think using anatomically correct words would be great. You use them, and there's a lot of books, children's books out there too that you could use. I'm trying to remember the name of this book, but it has to do with like something like I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it has something to do with like your bathing bathing suit parts or something like that, and kind of approaching it that way. Children's books are fantastic route to go through too. I love those. So yeah, so I would say as far as like how young is too young, I would say you could start pretty young, like 4 or 5, if they start asking questions. And if they're not asking questions and they're not interested and you're not comfortable, then that's okay. You can wait a little bit.
Yeah.
So
how do you think, say they come up to a certain age where the birds and the bees discussion can be discussed, and you and I both said a good age around that would probably be around 11 or 12.
Right when that puberty starts to hit. Yeah. Say right around puberty. Like if they're in school and they're showing, like what puberty is, right? Like I remember being in a classroom and like watching those videos about what's going to happen to your body when you start to go through puberty. That is a fantastic opportunity to talk about sex in the manner of birds and the bees. And first and foremost, like I wouldn't joke around about it too much, as much as it's like you might be uncomfortable about it, right? You might be like, I don't want to talk about this with my kids. Like I totally understand that. But keeping it a serious conversation, without being shameful about it, obviously, but to keep it in a serious manner, because sex is serious. And with that, when you're talking about sex in the birds and the bees, a really important thing that I think you should drive home is consent and knowing yourself. And so, and normalizing sex for somebody going through puberty, and making sure that they are informed on consent is like huge.
So in that time, I think that 11, 12 or whatever, when kids are starting to go through puberty, I think that's also when kids start to shift into this, into their own little minds, and they stop really going to parents a lot for guidance. What would you say to parents who may be feeling these things, how to keep an open relationship with your child so they feel comfortable going to them when it comes to sex?
First and foremost, I think it's like, if you've like never spoken about sex with your child before, you're kind of in an uphill battle, I would say. If you are only starting this conversation at the age of 11 or 12, there's a great chance they are not going to be comfortable coming to you and talking to you about it. That's just the case. I was lucky. I grew up, it was always something we talked about. I remember having a conversation and asking my mom what sex was, and she just says, really point blank, in regards to a heterosexual relationship, she was like, sex has to do with your genitals, sex has to do with pleasure and things like that. And then she, because of her religious background, she went into like marriage, but like that's a whole different situation. Yeah. But if you like never talked about that, it is going to be of an uphill battle. But a great way I think that you could placate that would be to, to just start the conversation, to normalize it, to say, hey, I do want to talk about this with you. It's really, and explain why it's important to talk about. Explain why it's important that they can come to you and talk to you about this.
Yeah.
If you are uncomfortable, they're going to know that. They're going to sense that. So you're going to have to learn to get comfortable with being uncomfortable when it comes to talking about sex.
Yeah, for sure.
And making sure that they know that. Like, knowing, like, be like, hey, you can always come and talk to me. I can always answer your questions. Because, yeah, kids are curious. They have access to the internet, and they're going through puberty. They're already looking stuff up.
Yeah.
Okay? I remember being, like, 9 and looking up what boobs, like, on the internet. Like, like just looking up, like silly words and trying to see what comes up from it, So.
Yeah. What are things that you can implement for children of all ages to create a communication between child and parent that is not going to repress sexual nature, but not also encourage it? You know what I'm saying?
You don't want to be like, yeah, have sex, things like that. I think surrounding a conversation about the child's comfortability with consent, like I said, consent, about like pushing this idea of, hey, like, when you're ready to start talking about this, when you're ready, if you have questions, when you're ready to have sex, whatever age they're at, and whatever age appropriate conversation you're having with that child, to make sure that it is about, like, it's about them. They have questions, their body. They have questions about their body, things like that. Where if if they're asking about, like, what, if you have a child that's asking about, like, where do babies come from, and if you're just being upfront and saying, hey, like, yeah, like, babies come from when two people have sex. Well, what's sex? Okay, well, sex is when there's, like, if you're talking strictly in regards to, like, having a child and bearing a child, then it's, yeah, like, when people typically have sex, it means that that a penis is ejaculating into a vagina. Like, just be upfront and honest with the child, and and use, like, those anatomically correct words with them, and normalizing it at a fairly young age, I think, is really important.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. So I just want to ask personally, what were things that were done in your household that you felt was done just absolutely spot on, so right, that helped you shape the sexual being you are now, and some of the things that you think that you might alter a little bit?
So something that I think that was spot on for me growing up was sex was never something really to be... Sex, as a general, was never something to be ashamed of. Like, there were certain things where it was like premarital sex was something to be ashamed of, which I would do differently. I would not have that. I'm not religious in that context. So, like, to me, that's something I wouldn't do, because I think that does create shame. And I don't know if I would necessarily put that more on my parents as much as I would in church, because I remember being in youth group and being pushed on wearing a purity ring and, like, being shamed about I will say, like, so that was something I would do differently. On top of that, I think talking about masturbation would be something that I would have done I would do differently. I think that wasn't really talked about in my household. I think when I would do that, like, when I was younger, I felt shame doing it, and I think it's because I thought it was wrong, and that has to do with, like, religion and premarital sex and all of that. But, like, obviously as an adult, I'm like, okay, obviously it's not a big deal. But I think one thing that was spot on was this idea where I remember having conversations with my mom, and she was like, sex is wonderful. It is beautiful. It is something that you should celebrate. when you're married. Like, that's kind of the caveat I'm talking about. But this idea that celebrating sex is not something to be, that is not a bad thing. And to say it is good, it is beautiful, it is great, I think are really wonderful ways to create a safe space for children and kids and preteens and teenagers to talk about those things. Obviously, I think that another thing that I probably would do differently would be, to talk about consent. I think that was just something that wasn't necessarily on the forefront of my parents' minds. I think it wasn't like... I
don't think it was really on the forefront of many people's minds. Things like essay and... Yes. They just weren't.
It was very taboo. This predated the Me Too movement. I think there was a lot of normalization around a lot of that stuff.
You also have to remember, like
my parents are boomers.
When we were younger, the Pam Anderson, Tommy tape came out. This is when we were like little, and the amount of psychoticness that was surrounding that sex tape. Yeah. People were losing their effing minds. And now there's so many famous people with OnlyFans, and it's like a normalized thing
very
now.
Much
so even looking in pop culture, like how different sex is treated.
Yeah.
And how consent is treated so differently nowadays. I mean, think about how many boomer people out there, judges, that will say things like, you can't rape your wife, you're married. And I'm like...
exactly.
Sir, there's still consent involved. Or you can't rape your husband, you're married. Yeah. That doesn't mean anything. If you're not getting consent, like...
A legal binding contract does not negate whether or not somebody wants to have sex or not.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say, things around, like, consent, revolving around consent would have been probably really helpful for me. I think... in my own experience as a young adult, and saying no, and not, fight, flight, or freeze, things like that, and being, comfortable in yourself to say no and not to internalize it and to speak up when you don't want something would have been really helpful. But I mean, it's not to say that I didn't have those conversations. It just wasn't a primary conversation. Like, it was like, if you don't want to, don't do it. But it wasn't, I think, emphasized enough for me. I would have appreciated more of an emphasis on that, and I think that's something I will do differently with my children, where it's like, when they're coming of age and they're going through puberty or past puberty, if my child... If I have a daughter and she comes up to me and she's a teenager and she's like, I want to get on birth control, okay, let's go do it. Yeah. I want my child to be comfortable enough with me where if they wanted to go on birth control because they're thinking about having sex, that they would be comfortable enough to come to me so that we can do that. I did not have that. The idea of talking about using birth control, that has to do with the whole religious premarital sex thing. But like, I was discouraged from using birth control because it was like, oh, well, if you do that, you're going to be encouraged to have sex, premarital sex. So it's like, there were things that were done really well in my household, and there are things that I would do very differently.
Did your parents at the time also believe in like not having birth control at all anyway?
No, that's like I think that's more, I think that follows Catholicism.
More Catholicism.
I don't recall ever thinking about that, because I think, like, there's marital couples that use birth control that are Christian, and
I know a couple where my dad and I DJ'd their wedding, and we're still friends with. They're like really great people. They have so many kids, and they're like, oh yeah, we don't believe in birth control. We're Christian,
right?
And I'm like,
there is like facets of Christianity where like birth control is like considered bad because it's like another form of an abortion, and
it's like
that's a whole conversation we could have.
I don't think it had anything to do with abortion. I think it was like they felt like if they got pregnant, it was God's will.
It was that's another way to look at it too. I mean that is a whole other conversation we can have. That in itself could be an entire episode.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't think there's any real age where you would have to say, no, it's inappropriate to talk about sex at a young age like that.
Yeah.
It just has to be age appropriate. Like, obviously, like, I mean, would I have a conversation with a 5-year-old about, like, penis vaginal sex? Like, probably not. I probably wouldn't. I would probably go about that in a very different way. Like, I would probably be like, these are your body parts, and like teaching about their body parts at a young age. And if they ask, like, where do babies come from, they come from, be upfront, they come from your uterus. I had a, you know, daddy and I, or whoever and I, had you because you ended up in my belly or something like that. You know, things like that where you're able to talk about that versus like lying to a child and saying like, because it was God's gift, or like it's so vague. And you can, I think, I mean, it's hard because it's like, you know, I don't want like mom shame or parent shame or anything like that. But I think that there's a lot of benefits with being just upfront and honest with your child.
I think also coming from that place helps the child too, because how many times have you heard of, well, it's when two people love each other so much and blah, blah, blah.
And that's not always the case.
No.
There are so many different types of families out there. There are children who aren't, they don't come from that, right?
Or they're adopted, or they come from a surrogate, or they come from IVF.
Yeah. Like, there's so many things, like, yeah. So, I mean, if you do have that with your partner and you guys did, you know, have a child that way, and that's amazing, good for you, and I'm happy for you. And if you need to placate a conversation in order to say that until you can figure out how you want to talk to them, okay, fine. But that doesn't mean bank on that. I would say eventually you're going to need to have like a conversation with them about their questions, because it's a very vague answer. You know? It's an incredibly vague answer.
It really is. So I did not have the talk with my mom.
Okay.
I had it with my dad.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my mom, she grew up extremely Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
So she's not super well versed in the American culture of how sex is just a normalized thing, even back then, for the most part. I mean, compared to a very Catholic Korean upbringing, it's very different here. So she kind of let my dad take the reins on that one. Also, my dad and I were just very, very, very close when I was young. So I felt like I was very empowered to say no to men when it came to my younger relationships with sex, just because when I was younger, the way that my dad had framed it was, hey, I was a piece of shit human being. I was a dirtbag. And, like, my dad owns it.
I feel like my dad was like that, too. He was like, men are wolves.
Yep. My dad totally owns that he used to be really shitty to women. He regrets it now because, you know, he loves my mom so much. And he's like, I can't imagine ever hurting your mom in that way.
Yeah.
So he's like, I feel so bad about all the things that I did. And he would go and
I'm sure it changed too once he had a daughter.
Oh, yeah.
Oh shit. I sucked.
He went into explicit details of how he would screw these women over too.
Oh.
So because of that, I was like, oh, men are fucking dogs from like a young age.
I literally have a distinct memory growing up of my dad. Like, I feel like this was a phrase repeated by him. Men are wolves, and when you're a young teenage pup, your hormones are everywhere and you don't care about anything except your own hormones. Like, that was like a big, my dad drove into me that like men are wolves and young cubs are stupid.
Well, and my dad and I were very similar in the sense that, like, in high school, neither one of us were very popular. We were both very bullied. My dad kind of saw that in me too. But he also saw that created a lot of vulnerability in me, that created a lot of insecurity in me. And he knew that men would thrive on that. And he became such a dirtbag because he was bullied so badly in high school that when he like went into the military and got, you know, beef caked up, he was like, I can have any bitch at the port.
That actually happens, I feel like, a lot, in vice versa with women too.
Yes.
I know somebody that it was so unfortunate. They were really badly bullied. I mean, and then they grew up and just blossomed into this beautiful woman, and they got off on screwing men over. Like, because they didn't get it.
I kind of got off on screwing over the men that like were shitty to me in high school.
Oh, trust me, I also did too. Like, I'm not saying like I also had my fair share of like fuck you. Like, I remember you were an asshole to me. Oh, now you're coming over to me and wanting something?
Yeah.
No.
Yes. I remember in high school I was treated so badly by men. Yeah. And I remember that me and a friend went out to the bars, and mind you, she was fairly popular in high school. We kind of like reconnected afterwards and like put the bullshit behind us. And we just like went out to like a fucking bar that all the locals would always come back to. At this point, I was already living in Chicago. I was doing my own thing. I kind of glowed up a little bit. And all of these boys that were so mean to me in high school were all trying to talk to me, all asking me questions. I was living near Wrigleyville at the time. They were like, oh my gosh, so you live near the Cubs Stadium, blah, 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 like trying to talk to me about it and all this other bullshit. And I was like, who the fuck are you? Fucking Chad, get out of my fucking face. I remember like they were like trying to talk to me about stuff, and I just kept rolling my eyes, and they're like, do you just not want to be here? I'm like, no, I just don't want to talk to you. And they're like, why are you so mean? Why are you so mean? I'm like, bro, why were you so mean in high school?
Oh, I had an experience too where somebody that was like nasty as hell to me in high school asked me out over like Facebook Messenger.
Ew.
Very soon after high school, by the way, and asked me out, and I think I'm trying to remember what I responded with, but it was like, I was like, you have been mean to me for the better part of 4 years. Why would I ever give you an opportunity to take me out? I think is what I responded with, like something to that degree, and then I was just left unread.
You know what? Also, like, and my partner and I have talked about this. You and I also have a little degradation kink. Some women get off on that shit.
Oh, like, yeah. Like, I mean, here's the thing, though. Like, there is a difference between somebody being, like, actually mean and, like, I feel like there's a difference between somebody, like, being, like, malicious and mean to you and doing it for sexual gratification. Like, I don't know. But for me,
okay,
at least.
I'm about to call him out here, and hopefully he doesn't listen to this and get mad, but he told me that, like, back when he was a little player, my partner and I are very open with each other about our past. We recognize that both of us have a past, and there's no judgment or shame around talking about any of it. So I want to put that out there. But he told me that, like, when he would go out to bars, he would, like, talk shit to women, and he's like, and it would fucking work. He's like, you wanted to get a girl, you would be mean to her.
I think there is some sense of accuracy with that. Like, okay, like, I don't know. I go back and forth. For me personally, though, like, it's like my husband and I talk shit to each other all the time, like almost like fake arguing, but we're flirting with each other. Yeah. Like, I'm always like, oh man, our neighbors must think we are fucking weird. Like, I'm like, stop being a little bitch. Like, I'll say things like that, and like vice versa. But we're like, we know we're joking with each other, and I'm okay with that. But like,
but again, that's still different.
It's like, different, yeah. I mean, like, if I came across somebody, there was somebody in my college who was very handsome, but he was such an asshole, and it pissed me off. I was so unattracted to his personality.
But I'm guessing that he got a lot of bitches.
I feel like he did. Like, but that was because, it's not because of the way he acted. I genuinely think it was because he was conventionally incredibly handsome. But I
think that's the point. Like, I think sexy men can do that.
Yeah, sexy men can. Like, okay, like when I first met my husband, I didn't know him. I never talked to him, but looking at his face, I was like, that guy looks like a douche.
Yeah.
I like thought he was going to be a douchebag, and he ended up being the nicest person.
No, he's so sweet. Which,
he's so nice.
I will say, like, my partner is a fucking asshole. He's not an asshole to me, but he's also not very nice to a lot of other people. I see that. Like, I see that, like, he is very much, I'm sorry, I'm just to my own horn right now. I got myself a fucking real book talk, man. Like, 100%. He is out of a dark romance novel. This man will fucking murder for me. I know that for a fact.
That's nice.
But he's a dick. Like, I see it. He's not.
It's like fiercely protective of the people he does care about.
But he's definitely an asshole. Like, I know.
You know what's funny is it makes sense though, because I don't really love, like, even with books, like, I don't love bully romances. Okay, we are way off topic right now, but I would just like to point out that I don't really like bully romances. I've read them, and I just, except like Haunting Adeline, that was like, I feel like the only one I really liked. That or like Draco Hermione Harry Potter fan fiction.
Oh my God.
That's like a whole different ballgame. We're way off topic.
It's okay. It's still it matters. It matters. This conversation matters.
It matters. Okay, it's all because we didn't get the proper conversations growing up.
Exactly.
But like seriously though, yeah. I mean, I feel like, I think going back to the topic we were talking about of how young is too young. I think, like I said, having age-appropriate conversations at all ages is okay to talk about sex.
I think also with what we were just talking about, though, we need to stop telling little girls that when little boys are mean to them, it means that they like them.
Yes, please stop doing that, guy. Like, even if it's true, even if like it's like, like they might think you're pretty or something. But then, like, there needs to be another conversation to be had about how that's wrong, about how you're being treated not right. That's not okay. Yeah. And having a conversation with that boy to say that is not how you express yourself when you like somebody.
I think I saw it on like TikTok or something. It was like a mom who had that conversation with her daughter, and she basically said something along the lines of, you know, maybe he really likes you, but he doesn't know how to express it. I think if you don't like that behavior, you need to tell him, if you want to spend time with me and you want to talk to me, I don't appreciate you being mean to me. You can talk to me nicely, or we don't have to talk or play at all. Yeah. It's clear, concise consent of like what you will and will not put up with.
That is a great way to go about that. I'm gonna write that down later. But seriously, like, that's really important. And even with, like, especially with boys, like, we need to do a better job on teaching our boys young boys how to communicate better.
Oh yeah.
If you like a girl, that's great. That doesn't mean pull their hair. That doesn't mean throw sand at them at the park. Like, that doesn't mean be mean or calling them names. Like, that is not the right way to do that, because that will eventually become a core value on how you treat women, and it's not okay. So yeah.
I think just going along the lines of educating your daughters on what consent is, also educating our sons on what consent is. I'm going to call out my cousin right now. She is such an amazing mom, and she has 2 boys. She's a boy mom. Yeah. And she was telling me about how her son, he's such a sweet, mushy little man. He's so sweet. And he was telling his mom about how the little girl on the bus, he loves her so much, he just wants to hold her hand. And how much he likes her, but she doesn't want him to hold her hand. And so she had to sit him down and say, you know, she does not like it when you want to hold her hand. When she says no, that means no. When she allows you to have that touch, you can have that touch. But if she says this is the line and you're not allowed to cross it, that's the line, and you're not allowed to cross it. You have to respect her space, and you have to respect her body. Yeah. And his little face, he was like, okay, but I just really like her. And like, it was so
like, you cute. Can like her from afar, but
yes, you can like her from afar.
I think, like, on top of, like, the sex talk, too, there are some really important foundational skills that I think are really important for children, boundaries being one of them. Teaching your child what boundaries are at the youngest age that you're able to do it, that's when you should start.
Yeah. I think my nephew I think when this conversation happened, he was 6. Yeah. That sounds about right. Like 1st grade. Yeah.
There's a little boy I know who is a toddler where boundaries are a huge conversation in the household, and it is something that as a toddler that I see I'm thoroughly impressed. Like, he understands boundaries better than some adults do. Okay, because you got to teach them young. And once they understand boundaries, they understand their own boundaries and they understand others' boundaries. It is so vitally important and a precursor to having those conversations about sex, because they go hand in hand a lot of the time. So
I 100% agree.
Yeah. So but I mean, those are just like I said, these are my opinions on this particular topic that is a sensitive topic. I am sure if there are people out here that listen to this, they will have a very differentiating opinion, and that is okay. This is, like I said, every household is different, every relationship with a child is different, every child is different, and it's gonna look different with every child, so, and with every parent. So but yeah, like I said, that's just my opinion on it. I know I keep like beating that down, but I just don't want people coming for me and being like, what the fuck do you know? You don't even have children. But I work with children quite a bit, and I was a child once.
I also want to say with that, I am so tired of people saying shit like, you don't have kids, you don't know what it's like. Motherfucker, I don't have kids because I know what it's like. Yeah, I made the conscious decision to like wait or not have them because of the fact that I've done the research. I've educated myself on how fucking hard it is to raise a child. Me, right now, I'm like, nah, I'm good on all that. I'm good on all that. I do want to be a foster mom, and that's so important to me.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But again, I'm doing all the research right now in my youth to figure out, like, okay, what is it that I need to do to be the best version of myself to show up for my child?
I love that. See, that's kind of how I feel about a lot of stuff. Like, I feel like I'm a nanny, and I feel like I'm like a mom in training right now. Because of all of these things that I get to learn and do and figure out now, so that when I have my own kids, I have an idea of what I want to do. And on top of that, like, you understand this too, like being in therapy for yourself, and understanding your own past, your own trauma, because I tell you what, I mean, I know this because I have had conversations with parents about this. I feel like with me working with children, I've already started to have this happen to me. Your own childhood comes up so often when you are working or being around children, because you're like, and in so many different ways too. Like, let's say you have a situation where you're having a child with a behavioral issue that they're dealing with, and how maybe you did the same thing when you were a child, and how your parents reacted to your behavioral issue versus how you're going to react to that child's behavioral issue is going to come up. Like, you will think about that, and you might do exactly what your parents did, and maybe that was the way to go about it. But there are plenty of times where I, myself included, where I'm like, something will pop up, and it will bring up things that have happened in my own childhood where I'm like, I would never do that to a child. I would never react that way to a child, because they're a child and they don't know any better. So
that's why shadow work is so important.
Oh my God, yeah, shadow work is so important.
Shadow work is so important.
So if you're planning on having kids, definitely do that self-inner work. And it's going to happen regardless. You're going to think about these things regardless, but at least you can kind of get a bit of a head start and understand yourself to a better degree, because I think a lot of the times people think that they will just wing it, right? And they go into it, and they go into parenting as a wing it mentality. And a lot of the times that is what it is. You're winging it. What the fuck do you know? We're all winging it. We're all winging life. But when you're able to have some of that self-work, you can figure out how you would want to go about it versus how your parents did it. And I think a lot of people will revert back to what they grew up with, because that's what they're comfortable with, because that's what they know. So that's
I also just want to throw something out there really quick. There is so much more education. There's so much more information. There's so much more statistics. Money revolved around putting scientific research
Books.
into the young mind. So when we talk about a lot of the things about our upbringing, or maybe if there's other people, other millennials who had some of the similar upbringings that we did, and some of the maybe like nuances of being a parent and things that we agree with, things that maybe we don't agree with, please also remember that your parents were trying the best that they could with very limited resources. And I truly believe that both of our parents, I've met your parents, you've met mine, I truly believe they did the very fucking best they could.
Yeah, like, I don't think my parents willingly, or most parents, I think, a lot, they're not willingly like, I'm gonna fuck up my kid.
Yes.
Like, nobody, no. I would really hope not. And if they are, then you're a piece of shit. But
But for the most part, I think a lot of times, like, and my mom and I have had this conversation, she kind of sometimes gets sad. She's like, I just feel bad. Like, I feel like I fucked up. And I'm like, you didn't have the education. You didn't have the resources. Like, you literally did the best you could.
And you have to think, too, with parents in the boomer generation, like our parents, because they didn't have that education, they reverted exactly to what their parents did, which is how, a lot of generational trauma persists.
Yes.
And now that we have the internet, we have the books and education to educate ourselves on, I find that I've seen it. I know you have too. There is such a cultural shift right now on how parents are raising their kids, and I tend to see, a lot where the pendulum is one way and it completely swings the other way. And somewhere in the middle is a sweet spot, right? Like, sometimes, and I think it's out of fear. Like, a lot of parents will, like, out of fear of fucking up their kids, will be almost like they don't discipline because they're scared of disciplining, and they don't want to fuck their kids up, but then that will create issues. So there's like, I love gentle parenting, but I also think it's important to have like good discipline too, and have appropriate discipline, because actions have consequences, and I think you have to teach children that, but you have to teach it that's age appropriate, and that's not going to be like detrimental to their growth, their psyche and things like that. So that's why I don't believe in spanking. I think that's fucked up. I don't think you should hit your child, and especially a lot of the times it's like, most of the time I feel like it's done out of frustration and anger from a parent, and rather than a disciplinary tool. And so I think and then people end up relying heavily on it, and then that's how you fuck up your kid, and
I just want it to be like a send-off note, like, hey, while we're having these discussions, let's also have some compassion and grace.
Oh yeah, listen, guys, we're not parents. These are our opinions. These are based off of our own childhood experiences. We're not here to parent shame. Being a parent is fucking hard as shit. I commend anybody who has decided to take that pathway, because it is not easy. It is so emotionally, physically draining to raise another human being, and to hopefully raise them into a good human being, especially when you got your own crazy shit that you can't figure out yourself. So,
for sure.
So that's a really great send-off note. So that being said, I feel like we kind of touched up on a lot of things. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, just differentiating opinions, we would love to hear them. I want to know what parents feel, or other people who had different childhoods and different ways to go about certain things. So please give us your feedback on this particular topic. And
but remember to be compassionate.
Okay? I don't want to, exactly. So if you would like to reach out to us, you can contact us at morethanmissionary69@gmail.com. That's morethanmissionary69@gmail.com. Or you can reach us at our social media pages on TikTok or Instagram at More Than Missionary. So again, we are your hosts. I'm Christina.
I'm Ashley.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode, and we will see you guys on the next one.
Thanks for watching.